Hey everyone, and thanks for this chance to talk a bit more in depth about school resource officers, or SROs, and their direct impact on putting so many of our kids of color, or with disabilities, into the cradle to prison pipeline. And thanks in advance for enduring around 13 minutes and 8 seconds as I briefly go over school safety and the racism and criminalizing our kids' behaviors at the national level, before turning specifically to the situation in Anne Arundel County, and then talking about what changes could and should be made to eliminate the inequities in school disciplinary protocols. And then I am happy to open up to questions or discussion. But before I start, I just wanted to share two things. First, people usually say, school to prison pipeline, but cradle to prison pipeline is actually more appropriate because the discrimination and abuse does start the moment many of our kids are exposed to the world, including in daycare centers. Plus, senators have officially changed pending national legislation to use the word cradle. The other thing I just wanted to share is the local chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice drafted a 9-page report on this topic, and that report has been shared with all of our county state delegates and Board of Education members. So why do we have SROs in the first place? In reality, school security has been around since the 19th century, but in terms of our definition of SRO, their presence has ramped up in the last 20 years as a knee-jerk reaction to mass shootings at schools. Now I say knee-jerk reaction because what I talk about in a minute will show how people did not take the time to think of the negative impact of armed personnel in schools. But the reality is, the fear of school shootings is very real and legitimate. An opinion piece in the Washington Post in 2018 put it in great terms, and that we might rely on statistics, but emotions take priority. And even though the actual odds of a student getting shot in a public school are 1 in 614 million, what parent never wants their child to be that one? In Maryland, the presence of SROs dramatically increased after Parkland, when Maryland passed the Safe to Learn Act of 2018, which requires high schools to either have ASRO or adequate law enforcement coverage, and of course all school systems opted for the SRO option. Turning to the next slide, the first question is usually, do school resource officers keep our kids safe? And if you ask Board of Ed members, or law enforcement, or pardon my stereotypes, high-income white families, you will hear hundreds of stories about SROs finding weapons and backpacks or building great relationships with kids and being mentors, all of which is fabulous. But the fact is, hundreds of wonderful stories should not overshadow the national statistics related to hundreds of thousands of kids. According to the FBI, the majority of mass shootings end when the shooter decides to end it, or if something like the weapon jams. At the same time, the Washington Post investigated SROs and found that, from 1999 to 2018, there were only 2 times when SROs stopped an active shooter, and we are talking almost 130 school shootings. And to put it in context, unarmed adults stopped 12 shooters in the same time period. I also wanted to share 2 other statistics that show how SROs bring increased danger to our kids and teachers. An NYPD report showed that trained police miss their mark 4 out of 5 times in gunfire, which is mind-boggling in itself. But then you have the other statistic from a national study that showed African Americans are more likely to be shot in split-second situations. Turning to SRO's impact on our youth, one of the core things people don't talk about enough is the trauma kids experience. Before COVID, approximately 72% of kids experienced at least one major stressful life event by the age of 18, usually involving violence or abuse. When you have that trauma, your fight, flight, freeze response is then overactivated, and so kids can interpret minor situations as threatening, and respond with agitation and anxiety, which SROs or other adults often misinterpret as non-compliance, which only further re-traumatizes kids and triggers their fear and anxiety response even more. I will get into more detail in the next slide about criminalizing youthful behavior, but the simple fact is, disorderly conduct arrests are double at schools with SROs compared to non-SRO schools. Most students are arrested for minor offenses as SROs criminalize students for minor disciplinary issues or behaviors that do not threaten school safety. For those who can see the screen, students are cited or arrested for everything from playground fights to throwing paper airplanes or carrots to kicking a trash can. And a 2014 nationwide study of SROs found that even though 77% refrained from arresting a student because the student had never been arrested before, 77% arrested a student in the past to calm that student down, 68% arrested kids to show that actions had consequences, and 55% arrested kids because teachers wanted the kid to be arrested, none of which are acceptable reasons to arrest anyone, especially given even if a kid never ends up in court. A single arrest can lead to a 25 to 50% increase of dropping out of school. I did want to share two incidents to put some humanity to the situation. In Maryland, the SRO and Secret Service were called in when a 7-year-old tried to pay for lunch with play money. Authorities reported it as counterfeit even though the money had the words play money in large, pink letters. And in Louisiana, police officers grabbed a 10-year-old black autistic girl by the ankles and dragged her away from a tree, lying face down on the ground, with handcuffs. An officer was pinning her down with her knees squarely on her back, while other officers and school administrators stood watching, as the girl yelled, "Help, I'm hurting." Why were the police there? Well, the girl started running around the classroom, climbing on desks, and knocking down classroom chairs, behaviors triggered when autistic children are placed in inadequate sensory environments. And so after she climbed out of the window and up a tree, school officials called the police, who, in turn, failed to respond to the situation in a manner appropriate for an autistic fourth grader. There are dozens of different statistics related to the racism and ableism triggered by SRO's conduct, but the bottom line is that students who are Black, Indigenous, or with disabilities are suspended and expelled at much higher rates than their white and able peers. And you can see, Black students are 3.4 times more likely to face exclusionary discipline, while Black disabled students at 5.2 times more likely. And just last week, the Sentencing Project released a 10-year study that showed even though youth incarceration has decreased, the disparity for youth of color has increased, including the disparity for Black youth increased by 49% in Maryland, and by 43% for Latino youth. So why does all of this matter in Anne Arundel County, which won national awards in the last year for SROs and police responding to emergencies? From 2016 to 2019, AACPS saw an 87% increase in arrests, which was the same time SROs were placed at all our high schools, and in that same time period, Black students were arrested at 2 to 3 times the rate of white students. 356 kids were arrested in our county during the 2018-2019 school year, which was more than any other county school system in Maryland, and 304 of those 356 arrests were by SROs. The Capitol also has police representatives and Deputy Superintendent Jackson on record stating the stark increase in arrests is due to increase in SRO presence, but AACS still plans to expand SROs to all middle schools. So I just rattled off all of these daunting statistics showing the harm SROs cause to our most marginalized kids. But the real conversation needs to be, how do we break apart this part of systemic racism in our schools? And there are several ways to bring about such change. In the immediate coming days, we can email state delegates to support bills restricting SRO's activities and decriminalizing youthful behavior. And a big shout out to Debbie for posting about these bills on Facebook. There also is the town hall on SROs next Wednesday, which can be an important venue to both ask questions and increase awareness of all of the inequities SRO's presence cause. We can also email the Board of Education in support of recommendations in the joint initiative to eliminate opportunity gap report, especially highlighting those addressing SROs. I am almost to the end, but I just wanted to highlight some of the recommendations in the Surge report, starting with the need for a publicly accessible MOU between AACPS and local police departments limiting role of any law enforcement who come into contact with schools, including by prohibiting irregular presence of law enforcement in schools, identifying incidents schools should not call the police, and if called, the police will not respond, setting strict limits on what law enforcement can and cannot do when they are called to schools, and making sure kids are not arrested in front of other students or staff. We also can advocate for the county council to redirect funds for SROs to AACPS, hiring additional mental health staff and wraparound services, getting publicly accessible monthly statistics back in place regarding discipline referrals, suspensions, expulsions, citations, arrests, and incidents of physical restraint, and finally getting AACPS to limit all suspensions to less than 5 days, with a plan to eventually abolish suspensions, with some exceptions. Given out-of-school suspensions decreases the chance of graduation, and increases the chance of arrest. Okay, I know that was a lot to take in, so I am happy to talk offline, but if anyone has any questions or comments right now, please share.